She held the phone with trembling fingers, the sterile white of the nursing home walls closing in like a coffin. The screen glowed in front of her, a live video sent by accident, maybe, or perhaps by cruel design. Her son's voice echoed faintly through the device, laughing as he carried a box through the front door, her front door. There it was, her house, her kitchen, her rug, worn down by years of late-night pacing with a teething baby. His baby. Now beneath a brand-new pair of stiletto heels. His wife swept in behind him like a queen assuming her throne, barking orders, rearranging photo frames, tossing her floral cushions into black trash bags without a glance. And the dinner table. It was set for 6. Candles lit. A roast glistened in the center, just the way she used to make it. Garlic, rosemary, the family recipe passed down from her mother. She wasn't there to light those candles. She wasn't there to serve the meal. She wasn't even invited. Her seat, now filled by a younger woman with glossy hair and perfect teeth, who leaned over to kiss her grandson's forehead and whispered something that made the whole table burst into laughter. Laughter like there was no ghost watching them from the other side of a pixelated screen, like she hadn't raised that man. From the cradle to this very chair, like she didn't exist. The nurse passed behind her, gently patting her shoulder. "Dinner time, Miss Evelyn." But Evelyn didn't move. She couldn't. Her eyes were locked on her son's face, the same face that used to light up when she walked in the room. Now, it held only comfort in her absence. The camera shifted. A toddler ran by in a onesie she had bought last Christmas. She remembered the moment, freezing outside in the snow, waiting in line, carefully picking the softest one, the one with the little bare ears. Now it was smeared with chocolate pudding and forgotten, like the hands that once wrapped it in golden paper with trembling care. She is a burden now. That's what he said. 5 days ago, standing at the edge of her hospital bed, eyes cold like wet steel. His words still scratched against the inside of her skull like sandpaper. "You need more help than we can give, Mom. We have our own lives. You're too much. This place is good for you. Too much. Too much love. Too much sacrifice. Too many nights without sleep. Too many decades of giving without asking for a damn thing in return." They wheeled her out the next morning. No goodbye from the grandkids, no hugs. Just the faint sound of dishes clinking as the family resumed its rhythm without her. Now, in the quiet of this cold room, she sat in a thin nightgown that clung to her bones. Her wrists ached. Her soul ached more, but it wasn't just pain sitting in her chest tonight. Something else had taken root. A seed. Small. Silent. Dark. She closed her eyes. Took a breath. What had she done to deserve this? Why was love, when given freely, always taken for granted? What makes a son forget the hands that taught him to tie his shoes? The voice that sang lullabies while holding his feverish body through. Long nights? She was not angry, not yet, but she was done waiting, done explaining, done giving. If they wanted to live without her, they would learn what that truly meant. She turned the screen off slowly, setting the phone down on the table beside. Her untouched dinner tray, cold peas, rubber chicken, gravy like glue. Let them eat the roast. Let them fill her chair. But something was coming for them. A storm wrapped in a mother's silence, and this time, she wasn't giving anything. She was taking it back. Evelyn had once been a force of quiet strength, the kind that doesn't scream to be noticed, but whose absence shakes the walls. She remembered the day her world cracked open, her husband James gone in an instant, a heart attack on the living room floor, while their son Daniel slept in the next room clutching a toy truck. She didn't cry that day. Not because it didn't hurt, but because she couldn't afford to. At 28, she became a widow and a mother who had to become 2 people at once. Every morning she would wake before the sun, pack school lunches with trembling hands, then rush off to work a double shift at the diner, smiling through chapped lips and blistered feet. No one saw her cry in the walk-in freezer, clutching a Hawaii photo of the life she'd lost, and the little boy she had to protect. She sold her gold bangles first, the ones James gave her on their wedding day, to pay for Daniel's school books, then her mother's pearls for braces, the engagement ring. That went when Daniel was accepted into university. She remembered placing it on the pawnshop counter, her fingers lingering for just a second too long. "It's for him," she whispered, as if to justify the severing of another piece of herself. The house, that was supposed to be hers. A place she and James dreamed of retiring in, surrounded by grandkids and laughter. But she gifted it to Daniel when he married, said it was his now, their wedding gift. She didn't need much, just the guest room, and even that she kept tidy, small, always out of the way. She never remarried, never dated. People said she was wasting her life, that she deserved companionship, love, but she had all the love she thought she needed wrapped up in her son's smile. She made every birthday cake from scratch, sewed costumes for every school play, waited outside parties in the cold so he wouldn't have to ride the bus home alone. When he was sick, she sat by his bed until the fever broke, whispering stories and placing cold cloths on his forehead like a prayer. She lived through his triumphs, his first job, his wedding day, his firstborn child, each moment a candle she lit inside her own heart. But with every milestone, she noticed something else. Her world shrinking. Fewer calls, shorter visits. The warmth in his voice replaced by politeness. Distance. Then the day came when she asked if she could keep a photo of James on the hallway wall, and his wife hesitated. "It doesn't really match the decor." She swallowed the sting, nodded, and quietly packed it away. And yet, she stayed, always helpful, always present, until slowly she was made to feel like a shadow, unseen, inconvenient, until her health began to falter, and instead of support, she was handed a brochure. "It's for your safety, Mom," he said, standing in the same doorway where she once watched him wobble toward her in diapers. "It'll be easier for everyone." Everyone. Everyone but her. Her bones were weaker now, but her memory wasn't. She remembered everything, every scraped knee kissed, every sleepless night, every sacrifice etched into her spine like scars no one thanked her for. She hadn't lived for herself, she had lived for him, every decision, every heartbeat. And in the end, she was erased like chalk from a board, quickly, cleanly, without apology. They said she needed help. But what she really needed was to be remembered, to be valued, to be seen. And now, alone in a room that smelled of disinfectant and dust, she realized something cruel. The life she gave them had become the weight they used to cast her out. But they had forgotten one thing. Love that deep doesn't disappear. It hardens. And somewhere beneath the ache in her chest and the tremble in her hands, Evelyn still remembered how to fight. The house was quieter than usual that morning, unnaturally still, as if it already knew what was coming. Evelyn had just folded the last of the laundry, Daniel's shirts, his wife's scarves, her grandson's little socks with superheroes on them, when she heard the front door close behind them. She smiled instinctively, the way mothers do, expecting the usual chorus of greetings, but their footsteps were sharp, hurried. They walked past her without acknowledgement, Daniel's eyes avoiding hers, his wife clutching her phone like a shield. Evelyn followed them into the living room, where something strange awaited. 2 suitcases by the door. Her suitcases. "What's going on?" she asked, a softness in her voice she barely recognized as her own. It was his wife who answered. First, lips pursed, voice rehearsed. "We've been talking, Evelyn, and we've decided this arrangement isn't working anymore." Evelyn blinked. "What arrangement?" Daniel stepped forward then, hands in his pockets, shoulders tense, like a child caught in a lie. Mom, we need our space, our own lives. It's been hard. The noise, the stress. It's a lot. I've tried to stay out of the way, she replied, a tremor running beneath her words. I barely leave my room. Exactly, his wife interjected, crossing her arms. It's not healthy. For anyone. We need privacy. Privacy. The word hung in the air like smoke. Evelyn looked at her son, desperate to find something familiar in his face. A flicker. Of guilt, of warmth, of the boy who once cried into her shoulder when his puppy died. But there was nothing. Just cold civility. Bureaucratic detachment. You've already packed my things, she said, more to herself than to them. We thought it would be easier, he said, like they were discussing a misplaced package. We found a place, a good one, comfortable. They have nurses and activities and— Do I get a say in this? She asked, her voice catching. It's not about punishment, Mom. It's about what's best for everyone. Her heart dropped at the word everyone. It had become the knife they kept using, carved out of convenience, not love. She glanced around the room. Her photos were gone. Her knitting basket, her slippers by the couch, the framed picture of her and James, vanished, erased, as though she had never been there. Her hands hovered over the suitcases like they might bite her. You planned this, she whispered. You decided this without me. Daniel stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. Don't make this harder than it has to be. She recoiled, as if his touch burned. There was no warmth in it, no goodbye, only pressure. And so she walked, one slow step after another, through the house she had built with her own hands, down the hallway where she used to tape up his school drawings, past the kitchen where she taught him to stir soup with one hand and hold a book with the other. Each step felt like walking through a funeral. Not hers, but Love's. The ride to the nursing home was silent. The car smelled like new leather and dust. Daniel didn't speak, just adjusted the air conditioning and kept his eyes fixed on the road. Evelyn stared out the window. The city, blurring past, and wondered how many other mothers had taken this same drive, packaged like an inconvenience, unloaded like a burden. He didn't walk her in. He didn't ask if she needed help. Just parked, popped the trunk, and lifted out, her suitcase like a man fulfilling a chore. They're expecting you, he said. They'll take good care of you here. She turned to him slowly. Will you? He froze. A flicker of something passed over his face. Guilt, maybe, or fear. But it was gone in an instant. I'll call you soon. He didn't hug her, didn't kiss her forehead, didn't look back. The door shut with a soft click, and the engine faded into the distance, leaving Evelyn standing alone with nothing but her name on a clipboard and a nurse, who smiled too brightly. The nurse said, "Let's get you settled, dear." But Evelyn knew better. She wasn't being settled. She was being put away. The silence in the nursing home wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that crept under your skin, heavy and cold, like fog that never lifted. Days bled into each other with nothing to mark their passing but the mechanical hum of fluorescent lights and the soft wheeze of distant oxygen tanks. Evelyn sat by the window each afternoon, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of bleach and lavender, watching the sun lower itself behind the trees like it was retreating too. Her phone, once her lifeline, a portal to the world she'd built and the people she had loved, now lay still on her bedside table, untouched, unwoken. No missed calls, no new messages, just the pale glow of a forgotten screen. She had tried at first, dialing Daniel, leaving voicemails filled with hesitant hope and motherly restraint. "Just wanted to hear your voice," she'd say. "No pressure, sweetheart." But days turned into weeks, and the silence answered more cruelly than any spoken word ever could. Her birthday came and went with no candles, no calls, no cards. Not even a text. The staff brought her a dry cupcake during lunch with a plastic candle stuck in it sideways. The nurse, the new one, who always called her Ellen, offered a cheerful, "Happy birthday, hun," like she was tossing crumbs. To a bird. Evelyn didn't correct her. She no longer had the energy to remind people of her name. It seemed easier to disappear when no one was looking. The other residents were kind but distant, the way people are when they've lost too many friends to invest in new ones. They shuffled to and from the cafeteria in their wheelchairs or walkers, sat in common rooms staring blankly at reruns, and rarely spoke unless spoken to. Evelyn tried to make conversation once or twice, a comment on the weather, a question about someone's knitting. But most responses were short, distracted, or filled with blank eyes that no longer recognized the point of talking. Meals were mechanical. She ate alone at the corner table, next to a dusty plastic plant, slowly cutting through overcooked vegetables and rubbery meat with shaking hands. She'd pause sometimes, fork halfway to her mouth, listening, not for voices, but for absence. The world she had given everything to had vanished. The walls of the home became her new geography. The gray hallway with flickering lights, the peeling wallpaper outside the laundry room, the faint drip of the leaky faucet in the shared bathroom. These became her landmarks. The only time she truly left them was in her memories. She would close her eyes at night and walk through the old house in her mind, hearing Daniel's giggles down the hallway, feeling James's arms around her as they painted the nursery, smelling the cinnamon from the Thanksgiving pies she used to bake with joy. But when she opened her eyes again, there was only silence and the dim ceiling above her. "Did I really deserve this?" she whispered one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon in slow surrender. The words were quiet, spoken not for anyone else but for the mirror of her own despair. What sin had she committed to be exiled so thoroughly? To be wiped clean from a life she built with her bare hands? She had no answers, only emptiness. And yet there was something beneath the grief now, a stirring. Not anger, not yet, but something deeper, something patient. In that silence, a seed of thought began to form. If love could be erased so easily, then maybe memory wasn't the only thing she could reclaim. Maybe the woman she used to be, strong, giving, fearless, wasn't gone, just buried beneath the weight of other people's convenience. For now, she waited, watched the sun die and rise again, spoke less, listened more, and quietly began stitching herself back together, thread by invisible thread. It was a Tuesday, the kind of day that passed without shape or color, when Evelyn decided to tidy her nightstand drawer, not out of purpose, but simply because she needed to feel like she still had control over something. The drawer was cluttered with small remnants of her former life: expired coupons, an old tube of lipstick, a wrinkled note from her grandson written in crayon that read, "I love you, Nana," a time capsule from when love had been simple and unconditional. Beneath it all, buried under a mess of unused stationery and half-filled word searches, her fingers brushed against something thicker, more deliberate. A white envelope, sealed but unmarked, except for a faint pencil scrawl in the top corner. Deed, copy. Her breath caught. She held it there in her hands for a long moment, as if it might vanish if she blinked. With trembling fingers, she opened it and unfolded the documents inside. Her eyes scanned the lines slowly, trying to make sense of the legal language. And then, there it was. Her name. On the property. The house. That house. The one Daniel and his wife had taken over like squatters in a forgotten castle. The one they'd filled with new furniture and new rules and cold laughter that never once echoed with gratitude. The deed, the actual, legally binding deed, showed that while she had added Daniel as a joint owner with rights of survivorship, she had never removed herself. The transfer had never been finalized. There had been talk, sure, discussions, promises, even a notarized form that Daniel was supposed to file. But apparently he hadn't. Whether out of neglect or assumption, he never completed the paperwork. And that meant, legally, the house was still hers. Her name still held weight, ownership, power. For the first time in what felt like years, Evelyn sat upright. The nurse walked by and asked if she wanted her tea refilled, but Evelyn didn't even hear her. She was staring at the document like it had spoken her name aloud for the first time in a long while. Something shifted inside her. A crack, not of weakness, but of awakening. All this time, she had believed she had given away everything, her house, her pride, her space in the world. She thought she had been erased. But no. There was still something left. Something Daniel didn't know he'd left in her hands. The house is still mine. The words whispered themselves across her thoughts, not with vengeance, not yet, but with something colder, sharper, clarity. She thought of the day they packed her bags without asking, of the silence that followed, of her birthday, of being called Ellen, of the locked door where her photo used to hang. And now, in the quiet of her sterile room, something ancient and maternal rose in her chest, not just love, not just hurt, but justice. She folded the deed back into the envelope and pressed it flat, smoothing the edges. This was not just paper. This was a weapon, a key. Proof that she hadn't been cast aside, not entirely, not yet. They had taken everything, or so they thought. But they had overlooked the one person who had built that home, brick by brick, year by year, with sacrifice they never saw and love they never valued. She tucked the envelope into the back of her drawer, beneath a stack of crossword books, where no one would find it. Not yet. She wasn't ready. The time would come. For now, she needed to think. She needed to plan. But oh, how the silence of isolation began to hum with purpose. That house, her house, was still her kingdom. And the Queen was no longer asleep. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. But for the first time in months, it wasn't because of sorrow. It was purpose that kept her awake now, stretching its limbs like a sleeping lion beneath her ribs. The next morning, she dressed with unusual care, choosing the pearl earrings she hadn't worn since James's funeral, pulling her thinning hair back neatly and applying a soft touch of lipstick. It wasn't vanity. It was preparation, presentation. She looked in the mirror and whispered, "You don't need to raise your voice to win." And she meant it. After breakfast, she slipped away to the facility's library, a dim room no one ever used, and took out the small, battered address book she had kept all her life. Page after yellowing page of memories passed beneath her fingers until she found the name she was looking for, Walter Green, retired attorney, old family friend, one of the few people left who knew her before she became just someone's mother. She dialed his number with trembling hands, not sure if he would even pick up, but he did. "Evelyn," he said, voice warm, aged, familiar. "Is that really you?" She smiled for the first time in weeks. "It's me, Walter. I need your help, and I can't tell anyone yet." The following week was quiet, on the surface. Evelyn continued her routine like nothing had changed. But behind the scenes, a plan was taking root. Walter drove out to see her himself, tall, graying, and still sharp as a whip. They sat in the garden, feigning small talk for the staff, but between them passed more than pleasantries. Deed copies, legal language, statutes. He confirmed what she already knew. The house was still partially hers. And that was enough. "If you want to pursue this," he said gently, "you'll need to act methodically, quietly. We'll need to update your will, shift some accounts, make a few things official." Evelyn didn't flinch. "I want it done." They began the process discreetly. A new will was drafted, placing everything in her name and specifying where it would go. Not to Daniel, not to his wife, but to a charitable trust in her, and James's names to benefit elderly women without families. Her bank accounts, what little she had, were moved under a new structure, protected, secure. She visited a notary under the guise of a doctor's appointment, hand steady as she signed, document after document, initials looping like gentle revenge on every page. Walter filed the first motion regarding the house's title just a few days later. It would be quiet, a procedural formality at first, but soon it would ripple. The house was legally her property again, a fact, not an argument. And Daniel, too self-assured, too careless, hadn't seen it coming. Evelyn didn't brag, she didn't rant, she didn't leave messages or send threats. She didn't need to, because power isn't always loud. Sometimes it moves like mist through the cracks, and by the time you notice it's there, it's too late. In her room that night, Evelyn placed the new will in a manila folder and labeled it simply, Legacy. She slid it into the bottom of her drawer, next to the deed, her silent trophies. She didn't feel triumphant exactly, but she felt real, present, herself again. What Daniel had forgotten, what they all had forgotten, was that a woman doesn't lose her strength with age. It simply condenses, refines. It becomes sharp, elegant, and patient. And when it returns, it cuts clean. Evelyn sat by the window, watching the sunset with her fingers folded calmly in her lap. The silence hadn't changed, but now it was hers. The storm was coming. And she would greet it not with shouting, not with rage, but with a smile and the strength of a woman who had been underestimated for far too long. The envelope arrived on a Monday morning, delivered not by Evelyn, but by a process server dressed in a navy suit and a cold smile. Daniel opened the door expecting a package, maybe another kitchen gadget his wife had ordered, but instead was handed a stack of neatly stapled papers with the words, "Notice to vacate," printed in bold across the top. For a moment, he thought, it was a mistake. Then he saw the name on the return address. Evelyn M. Clark, his mother. Inside the house, his wife called from the kitchen, "What is it, babe?" Daniel didn't answer. His face had turned ashen. The legal jargon might have been dense, but the meaning was simple enough even for him to understand. The house he thought was his, the one he'd remodeled, redecorated, and ruled over like a small king, was never legally his. His name had been on the plans, yes, on the parties and the title cards, but not on the deed. And now Evelyn had activated her right as co-owner, backed by newly notarized documents, and she wanted it back. They had 30 days to vacate. No appeal, no delay, just a firm, cold deadline. When he finally called her, the first time in months, she let it ring until voicemail. He didn't get to hear her voice, only the robotic tone and the quiet click that followed his panicked message. "Mom, what are you doing? Please call me. Let's talk about this." But she didn't want to talk anymore. 2 days later, the real estate sign appeared in front of the house. A sleek, modern listing with photos of the newly renovated kitchen, the one Evelyn never got to cook in, and a description that read, "Charming family home for sale, ready for a new beginning." Evelyn didn't set foot in the house again. She didn't need to. The papers were filed. The decisions were made. Instead, she sat in the garden of the nursing home, sipping tea while reading the online article that had started to make rounds. Abandoned mother reclaims her home and her dignity. Walter's niece, a junior journalist at a lifestyle blog, had caught wind of the story and published a piece late one night titled, "The Mother They Forgot." It was emotional, raw, and full of the quiet power that Evelyn had carried through every step. The article spread like wildfire. Comment sections overflowed with outrage, sympathy, and admiration. Tweets turned her into a symbol, an Evelyn's revenge. TikToks narrated her journey over soft piano music, showing montages of mothers who had sacrificed and been cast aside. Strangers began sending her letters. One read, You reminded me to call my mother. Thank you. Another. You're not a burden. You're a blueprint. But as Evelyn's story bloomed in the hearts of millions, Daniel's world began to rot. His marketing firm, built on a carefully curated image of family values and emotional storytelling, was suddenly under scrutiny. Clients pulled contracts. Old college friends unfollowed him publicly. Even his in-laws stopped returning calls. The optics were damning. A man who had exiled his elderly mother to a nursing home while profiting off slogans like "Integrity begins at home." He tried to spin it, posted a vague apology on social media, the kind that didn't say much. But implied misunderstanding. It only made things worse. One comment under his post read, "You didn't just lose your mom. You lost your soul." And Evelyn? She remained quiet. Never once spoke to the press. Never gave an interview or answered the endless requests for a public statement. She let the silence speak for her. The same silence they had once drowned. Her indot on the 31st day, Daniel and his wife packed their things. They didn't ask for a meeting. They didn't try to fight. They just left, shoulders tight with shame, unable to look the neighbors in the eye. The house sat vacant for just a week before it was sold. A cash buyer, charmed by the story behind. The property. The proceeds went directly into a foundation Evelyn created. The Clark Fund for Forgotten Women. An organization that would go on to provide small grants, legal aid, and housing support for elderly women discarded by their families. The Z nursing home changed too. After the article's viral spread, donations came pouring in. New books in the library, fresh wallpaper, warmer food, and Evelyn's room? Renovated at no cost, with a view of the lake and a little garden of her own, where she planted lilies, James's favorite flower. Every morning she tended to them in silence. No fanfare, no need for applause. The world had seen her now, and more importantly, so had she. One evening, a young staff member approached her. "Miss Evelyn, can I ask you something?" Evelyn looked up from her book. "Of course. What made you do it?" "All of it. The legal stuff. The house. Everything?" Evelyn smiled, not with smugness, but with grace. "I just remembered who I was," she said gently, "and I decided I didn't need to raise my voice to take it all back." The first call came at 6:12 a.m., as the sky was just beginning to turn from violet to gold. Evelyn was already awake, sipping her tea beside the window, watching the sunlight stretch itself across the floor. Her phone buzzed once, then again. Daniel, mobile. She didn't move. The screen lit up with the familiar name, a name that once meant safety, joy, belonging. Now it was just a stranger's echo. The call went to voicemail. He called again at 7:03, then again at 8:20. By the fourth call, she simply turned the phone over so she wouldn't have to watch it light up. No panic, no hesitation, just a calm, quiet refusal, a boundary. For the first time in years, she realized she owed no one a performance, not even him, not anymore. The messages began to pile up. Soft pleading turned to desperate rambling. "Mom, please, I didn't know. I didn't mean to. Can we talk? Can we fix this?" In one message, his voice cracked. In another, he started to cry. "You're my mother. I'm sorry. I was stupid. I was overwhelmed. You didn't deserve it. Please, just let me say it to your face." But Evelyn remained still. She had said everything she needed to say, not with words, but with action. With truth, with paper trails and court filings and deeds. She didn't need to yell. She didn't need to sob. She had rewritten the ending with a pen and silence, and it had spoken louder than any apology could. By Thursday, a letter arrived. Not from Daniel, from her. His wife. The same woman who had once tossed Evelyn's photo frames into a donation box like unwanted clutter. The envelope was thick, heavy with the weight of guilt veiled in passive aggression. Evelyn held it. For a moment, thumb brushing the expensive cream paper, and then sat down at her writing desk to open it. The handwriting was precise, practiced, calculated. The words were worse. "Dear Evelyn," it began, as if they had ever shared affection that deserved such a gentle address. "I hope this finds you well. I just want to say that none of this was personal. We were doing what we thought was best for our family. It wasn't easy for us either, and I hope you can see that. The decision to ask for more space was made with your comfort in mind, not out of cruelty. But what you've done, this public humiliation, the eviction, the story in the press, you've destroyed Daniel. He can't sleep. He's lost business. People look at us like we're monsters. I hope you can live with that." There was more, of course. A few veiled insults, a few sugar-coated attempts at shame. At the bottom, she'd scribbled, "We're family. We should forgive each other." Evelyn folded the letter slowly, thoughtfully. She didn't rip it. She didn't cry. She didn't even flinch. She simply walked to the small waste bin beneath her desk and with quiet finality dropped the letter inside. It landed with a soft rustle beside the envelope and the pretense it carried. That night, Daniel called again and again. Each time, she let it ring. Her voicemail filled up, and she didn't bother to clear it. The next day, the staff handed her a delivery, a bouquet of pale pink roses, the kind she once told Daniel reminded her of her wedding day. Attached was a card. "I miss you. I'm sorry. Please talk to me. D." She set the flowers down in the hallway with a polite smile. "Someone else might like them," she told the nurse. The truth was, she didn't need apologies anymore. She needed peace, and peace had finally arrived, not with reconciliation, not with dramatic confrontations or closed-door meetings, but with dignity, with knowing that she had survived what should have broken her, with understanding that she had loved purely, given selflessly, and that what happened after wasn't her fault. Some people only know how to love conditionally. Some only see value in what serves them. But Evelyn was done proving her worth. She had nothing left to justify. The staff began to notice something different about her. She walked a little straighter, smiled a little more. She started volunteering in the shared reading room, helping other residents with crossword puzzles, offering to write letters for those who could no longer hold pens steady. One of the newer nurses said, "She has a regal calm about her, like she's been through fire and chose not to burn." Evelyn overheard once and said nothing. She didn't need to explain herself anymore. She still sat by the window each morning, still watched the sun rise, still drank her tea. But now, when her phone rang, she simply let it. And as it buzzed with guilt and regret and too late apologies, Evelyn felt nothing but clarity. She had mourned her son already, not his death, but the death of what she believed he was. That version of Daniel no longer existed. And the woman she had become had no room for ghosts who only wanted to haunt her when it was convenient. The silence didn't hurt anymore. It protected her. It became her armor. And in that silence, Evelyn built a new kind of life, not one centered around sacrifice, but around self, around choice, around freedom. And so, while the world whispered, while the phones rang, while the past tried to claw its way back through guilt and flowers and fading excuses, Evelyn simply lived. And the silence, her silence, thundered louder than any apology ever could. The cottage sat at the edge of a sleepy little village where the trees whispered instead of roared, and the wind carried the scent of rain and old books. It wasn't much. A single story with ivy creeping up one side and a wooden porch that creaked with honesty. But to Evelyn, it was everything. For the first time in years, the home she lived in was hers entirely, not just in name, not just on a deed, but in spirit. She moved in during the early days of spring, when the world felt like it was just beginning again. The moving truck arrived with only a few things: her mother's rocking chair, the faded photograph of James that she'd restored and reframed, a box of yellowed recipe cards, and one suitcase of clothes. That was all she took, and all she needed. She bought a small round dining table with her first pension check. It had room for 4, though she expected few guests. Still, something in her refused to buy a table for one. She placed a tiny vase in the center, and every Sunday morning she walked to the local market and bought herself fresh lilies. James had loved lilies. It was her way of saying, "I remember," but not, "I'm stuck." At the local community center, Evelyn noticed a flyer pinned on the corkboard by the front desk: Silver Pages Book Club for women 60 and wiser. The words made her smile. She attended her first meeting a week later, hands shaking with the kind of nerves she hadn't felt since her schoolgirl days. But the women welcomed her like an old friend. They passed her tea in mismatched mugs and argued lovingly over plot twists. Some of them had lived through heartbreak, others through war. One had left her husband after 40 years. Another had lost both her children and still managed to laugh with her whole body. These women didn't talk about regret like it was shameful. They wore their pain like medals, not because they were proud of the suffering, but because they had survived it. It wasn't long before Evelyn began volunteering with a nearby support group for elderly women who had faced abandonment, some by children, some by partners, some by time. They met twice a week in a sunny room above a church, sitting in circles that didn't judge. Evelyn listened more than she spoke at first. The stories were all so painfully familiar. One woman described the day her son moved her to a facility and sold her garden shed without asking. Another whispered about being left in a hospital hallway for hours because no one came to pick her up. Evelyn didn't offer advice, she offered presence. Eye contact, a steady hand, a reminder that they weren't invisible. Eventually, they began to ask her to speak. Her story had traveled quietly through the village, like smoke curling under a door. When she shared it, calmly, without bitterness, it didn't feel like reliving trauma. It felt like planting something. And the women around her watered it with their nods and tears. She kept her mornings for herself. She'd make coffee, sit on the porch wrapped in a shawl, and read from one of the paperbacks the book club passed around. Sometimes it was Austen, sometimes Morrison. Sometimes she just watched the birds land on the feeder she'd nailed to the fence. The quiet didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. It felt deserved. It felt holy. For the first time in a long, long time, Evelyn laughed without looking over her shoulder. She didn't worry that it was too loud or too inconvenient. She laughed with her head tilted back, eyes crinkled, hands pressed to her chest as if to hold her heart in place. It felt like reclaiming oxygen, like breathing fully for the first time since she was a girl. One afternoon, while tending the small herb garden she'd planted by the kitchen window, Evelyn caught her reflection in the glass. Her hair was thinner now, whiter. Her face carried the map of a full life, lines of sorrow, of joy, of time. But her eyes were not tired. They were bright, sharp, alive. For a long moment, she just stared at herself. And then she whispered aloud, without shame, "Maybe I wasn't the burden after all." The realization didn't come with fanfare. It came quietly, like morning light slipping under a closed door. They had called her that, made her feel it, wore her down with sighs and silence. But the truth was simple. Evelyn had never been the burden. She had been the foundation, the backbone, the giver. They had been the blind ones, blind to her sacrifices, blind to her grace, blind to the strength it took to love without condition. And now, with every sunrise that fell upon her new cottage, with every book she read, every hand she held, every meal she cooked for herself, not out of obligation, but care, Evelyn was living proof that dignity doesn't die in silence. It is reborn in it. Spring melted into summer, and Evelyn's little life bloomed with it. She painted the kitchen cabinets a soft seafoam green, baked blueberry scones every Thursday, and hung a wind chime by the door that jingled softly when the breeze passed through. Her days were slow, but they were full, not of noise, but of meaning. She spent hours in the local library helping other seniors set up email accounts to connect with their grandchildren or print out old photos to frame. Her world, though smaller than it had once been, was now hers to shape. There was peace in the ritual, and even more peace in knowing that she had nothing to prove to anyone anymore. She stopped checking her phone for messages from Daniel. The device still sat on her desk, always charged, but it no longer felt like a lifeline. It was just a tool now, for music, for audiobooks, for the occasional video call with someone she chose to let in. And yet, her silence remained misunderstood. Occasionally, another letter would come, from someone Daniel had nudged, a distant cousin or mutual acquaintance who had been fed half the story and expected Evelyn to explain herself. She never replied. She no longer felt compelled to argue. Her worth. The community began to know her not as someone who had been wronged, but as someone who had quietly thrived. They called her Ms. Clark, with warm respect. She was invited to speak at the local women's center during a panel on elder dignity. Her speech was simple, unpolished, but it moved the room. They said I was a burden, she had told the audience, looking up from her notes. But I was never heavy. They just never bothered to carry anything but themselves. The applause that followed was not loud, but it was long. And Evelyn felt it, not as praise, but as affirmation. She didn't need validation. But hearing other women cry quietly in the back row, holding tissues to their faces, made her realize something important. Her story had become a mirror in which others saw themselves. And maybe that was the gift she had never expected to give. When autumn rolled in, Evelyn lit candles in the windows and began knitting again. Scarves and mittens for the shelter, tiny blankets for newborns at the hospital. She no longer moved, with the urgency of someone trying to stay relevant. She moved like someone who had nothing left to prove, but plenty left to enjoy. At the senior center's winter potluck, she brought her famous apple pie, the one James used to say could end wars, and found herself at a table surrounded by women laughing so hard they wiped tears from their eyes. There was a new woman at the group that night, shy, freshly abandoned, unsure of her place. Evelyn sat beside her and poured her tea. "You're not broken," she said gently. "You're just between chapters." Sometimes Evelyn still had dreams of her son. In them, he was young, the child she once carried on her hip, the boy, who begged her not to leave during his first day of school. But even in her sleep, she knew better now. Love, to be real, cannot be one-sided. And forgiveness, while noble, was not something she owed simply because someone asked. She forgave herself. First, for the years of silence, for the aching hope, for believing love would protect her from betrayal. And in that forgiveness, she found the kind of freedom that couldn't be revoked. One morning, standing on her porch in the cool dawn, she looked out over the hills beyond her cottage and whispered into the wind, "Thank you for leaving me." It wasn't sarcasm. It was grace. Because in being left behind, Evelyn had finally found herself. She was not someone's burden. She was her own beginning, her own middle, her own home. And that was more than enough. The evening light spilled through Evelyn's kitchen window like melted gold, soft and slow, warming the tiled floor beneath her bare feet. It had been a peaceful day. She'd spent the morning tending to her herb garden, the afternoon baking fresh focaccia with rosemary and sea salt, and now she was preparing her dinner. No fanfare, no guest list, just her. And yet, there was ceremony in the simplicity. She laid a linen cloth across her small round table, smoothing its corners with care. She chose her favorite plate, white ceramic with a hand-painted blue rim, and placed a neatly folded napkin beside it. A single glass of water with lemon, the bread still warm from the oven. A bowl of creamy mushroom soup she had simmered from scratch. She lit a candle. Just one. Its flame flickered quietly in the center of the table, casting soft shadows that danced against the walls. She dimmed the overhead lights and put on a record, old jazz, warm and crackling. Billie Holiday's voice spilled gently into the room, and Evelyn swayed slightly as she ladled soup into her bowl. There was no tension in her shoulders, no rush in her movements. She wasn't trying to impress. She wasn't trying to be small. She wasn't performing for anyone's approval. This dinner, this quiet, intentional meal, was an act of self-respect. She carried her bowl to the table and sat down. Her hands rested in her lap for a moment, eyes closed, taking in the scent of the herbs and the comforting glow of the candle. For a heartbeat, she said nothing, did nothing, just breathed, and then she smiled. She picked up her spoon and took the first bite. Savory, creamy, perfect. She closed her eyes, letting the flavor settle. She wasn't thinking of anyone who wasn't there. She wasn't haunted by memories of a table too full or a chair too empty. For the first time in a long, long time, there was no ache beneath her ribs, only peace. She ate slowly, listening to the crackle of the vinyl, the wind brushing the chimes outside, the occasional creak of the old house settling in for the night. Every sound was a comfort. Every breath a hymn. She didn't need company to feel whole. She didn't need validation to feel real. And as she reached for another piece of bread, torn from the warm center and dipped gently into the soup, she thought about all the times she had eaten in silence before, in kitchens where her presence was tolerated but not treasured, in rooms where her voice had been softened into a whisper. Tonight, though, she wasn't silent out of sadness. She was silent by choice, because silence, she'd learned, can be sacred. She thought of the guest room she no longer had to sleep in, the house she no longer had to walk on eggshells inside, the faces that used to look through her instead of at her. And then she thought of the women she now spent time with, the strong, stubborn, graceful warriors who knew what it meant to be discarded and had risen anyway. She thought of their laughter, their hugs, their tears, their stories. She thought of how far she'd come from the woman who sat in a nursing home wondering if she mattered. She mattered. Every bite was a reminder, every breath a return to herself. Part 4. Of 4. As the candle burned lower and Billie's voice gave way, to soft saxophone, Evelyn gathered her empty dishes and walked them to the sink. She didn't rush. She washed each item slowly, the warm water soft against her hands. There was no noise, no interruption, just a rhythm, the rhythm of a woman who had made peace with the silence and had learned to move within it. She dried the plate, folded the napkin, blew out the candle. Then, with the faint scent of rosemary still in the air and the music fading into the background, she turned toward the window. The sky was a deep indigo now. A single star blinked into view. She placed her hand on the cool glass and stood there for a while, not thinking about what was lost, but about what had been found, herself, not the mother who gave too much. Not the woman who waited by the phone, not the shadow in someone else's home. She was Evelyn Clark, a woman who had been pushed aside and had risen with dignity, a woman who had reclaimed her name, her story, her table. She reached for her shawl, draped it over her shoulders, and walked out to the porch. The wind was soft, the night still. Crickets chirped in the garden, and the wind chimes danced with silver notes. She sat down in the rocking chair, James's chair, and leaned back, her eyes closing. She smiled again, not because everything was perfect, but because it was hers, the moment, the meal, the silence, the peace. And then, in the quiet warmth of her home, Evelyn whispered to the stars above. This time, I ate at my table, alone and free. The days grew longer, softer. Spring unfolded gently over Evelyn's quiet corner of the world, wrapping her cottage in a hush of blooming lilacs and warm breezes. She spent her mornings walking along the gravel path behind the garden, where wildflowers spilled onto the trail and rabbits darted from one bush to the next. Her body ached a little more than it used to, but the ache no longer reminded her of what she'd lost. It reminded her of all she had survived. One morning, while tidying her bookshelf, Evelyn came across an old leather box, something she hadn't touched since before the move. She opened it slowly, and there they were, yellowing envelopes, handwritten pages folded with care, bound with twine. The letters I never sent, to Daniel, to his wife, to her grandchildren, to James. The words inside were raw, bruised with emotion. She had written them during her earliest days in the nursing home, moments of confusion, of pain so sharp it had nowhere else to go but paper. There were pages stained with tears, sentences that trembled with longing, whole paragraphs she didn't remember writing. In one, she had begged her son to visit her. In another, she had poured out apologies that weren't hers to make. There were letters to James, too, written in the dark when she needed someone to witness her grief, even if only in memory. I did everything I could, she'd written once, but somehow they still made me the villain. She sat on the edge of the bed and reread them all, not with regret, but with compassion for the woman she had been. And then she did something unexpected. She took out a fresh sheet of paper, dipped her pen in ink, and began writing again. But this time, the letter wasn't filled with sorrow or blame. It was a letter to herself. She wrote, "Dear Evelyn, you were never the weak one. You were the thread that held it all together, the invisible seam, the steady hand, the soft voice that raised generations. And when they broke you, you didn't vanish. You rose, you endured, you healed. You forgave yourself for what others never saw. You rebuilt a life not around them, but around you. And look at you now. You are not waiting anymore. You are not begging anymore. You are not hoping to be chosen. You chose yourself, and I am so proud of you. Love, Evelyn." She folded the page, slid it into an envelope, and placed it in the center of the box. The other letters, all the ones filled with longing and silence and pain, she carried outside, one by one, and placed in her small fire pit. She didn't rush. She watched them burn slowly, flames licking away the old ache, the old stories. She didn't cry. She just stood there with her arms folded, warmed by the fire, and the knowledge that those words no longer belonged to her. They were chapters. She had closed. She wasn't writing for closure anymore. She was writing to begin again. And from the ashes, a new story was ready to rise. The invitation started as a thought, soft and uncertain, like the way morning fog creeps over a hillside before the sun claims the sky. Evelyn had been sitting on her porch, watching the wind dance through her garden when she imagined it. A table not of silence, but of sisterhood. A gathering, not for grand speeches or therapy circles or dramatic declarations, just tea. Tea and warmth, tea and laughter, tea and shared breath, between women who had known what it was to be forgotten. And so, she wrote 6 simple notes in her neat, careful handwriting and handed them out discreetly after the next support group meeting. "Come to tea," they read, with the date and her cottage address, and no explanation. That Sunday afternoon, the gate creaked open one by one, and the women came, unsure at first, holding pans of scones or jars of jam, wearing cardigans that smelled faintly of cedar and lavender. They stepped inside Evelyn's home as though they were entering a sanctuary, and in many ways they were. She'd prepared everything herself, A table set in the garden with mismatched teacups, fresh wildflowers in jam jars, buttered toast triangles, and a kettle that whistled like an old friend. The first minutes were shy, polite. A clink of spoon against cup, small nods, soft smiles. But then something shifted. Someone made a joke about forgetting where they put their glasses, and someone else laughed so hard she snorted into her. Tea. That was the beginning. By the end of the hour, stories flowed like honey, sweet and slow and full of hidden aches. One woman spoke about her son's wedding, how she'd only found out from a neighbor. Another shared how she'd hidden birthday cards in her drawer for grandchildren who no longer called. And Evelyn listened, not as a host, but as a witness. She didn't speak much at first, just passed the scones and refilled cups and made sure everyone's chair was steady. But eventually, they turned to her. "You're the reason we're not ashamed," one said, eyes misty. "You made dignity look like something we could hold again." Evelyn smiled. "You've always had it. You just forgot." After that first gathering, the women kept coming. Every other Sunday, Evelyn's garden became a haven. The tea became a ritual. They brought poems they'd written in the night. Pie recipes passed down through aching generations, even a few faded photographs of the selves they used to be. They stitched each other's tears back together with gentle hands and unspoken understanding. Some of them began writing letters, not for sending, but for releasing. Evelyn placed a wooden box on the table, labeled, "Let It Go." Each week, it filled with heartbreak, with rage, with memories too heavy to carry alone. At the end of each month, they burned them together under the stars. No tears, no ceremony, just women choosing to be weightless for once. Evelyn didn't lead them. She held space. She offered safety. And in return, she found herself surrounded by something she never expected. A family. Not bound by blood or obligation, but by mutual reverence. They began calling her Mother Evelyn, half in jest, half in truth, and she didn't correct them, because the name felt like a rebirth. It wasn't a reminder of what she'd lost. It was a celebration of what she'd become. She was no longer the woman in the corner of someone else's life. She was now the hearth, the center, the quiet revolution that began with a kettle and a table for 6. And as seasons changed, and birds nested, and the garden bloomed brighter, with every visit, Evelyn knew this was no longer just a tea circle. It was a resurrection of joy, of voice, of worth. They came for tea, but they stayed for freedom. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind where the light moved slowly across the wooden floor and the air smelled like baked peaches and cinnamon. Evelyn had just finished arranging new wildflowers in a glass pitcher when she heard it, a knock. Not the tentative rattle of the mailman or the neighbor's quick tap. This was different. A pause, a breath. Then again, knock knock, soft but certain. She opened the door and stood still. On the porch stood a girl. No, not a girl, not anymore. A young woman, 19, maybe 20, pale green eyes behind round glasses, a canvas satchel hanging from one shoulder. Evelyn knew her instantly. It didn't matter that she had grown, that her voice had likely changed. Blood knows blood. "Hi," the girl said. Her voice cracked in the middle like she hadn't used it all morning. I think I'm your granddaughter. I'm Lily." Evelyn's hand remained on the doorknob. She didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She just looked. Not through her, not beyond her. At her. "Yes," she said quietly. "You are." Lily shifted her weight nervously. I found some of your story online, and I didn't know. I wasn't told." Her voice trembled now. "I just wanted to see you, if that's okay." Evelyn nodded, stepped back, and gestured to the little bench beneath the kitchen window. Lily entered slowly, looking around like she was walking through memory that wasn't hers, but somehow felt like it could be. They sat. A breeze passed. through the open window, lifting the scent of the lilies Evelyn had picked that morning. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lily said, "He told us you were sick, that you wanted to leave, that it was better this way." Evelyn's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I know." "He lied to us," Lily whispered, shame rushing in with the admission. "I'm sorry. I didn't know what to believe until I read about you, about the house, the article. I needed to see for myself." Evelyn looked at her, really looked, and saw not a child to comfort or a mistake to fix, but a young woman seeking something real. She reached out and gently took her hand. "You're here now," she said. "That's enough." Lily burst into tears, not the kind that needed comforting, but the kind that washed away years of confusion, of misplaced loyalty, of inherited guilt. Evelyn let her cry. When she was done, Evelyn poured them both some tea, the same way she did for all the women who came to heal. And in between sips and soft questions, Lily began to talk about college, about drawing, about her mother's long silences and her father's quick temper. "I think I always knew something wasn't right," Lily admitted, eyes downcast. "But I didn't have a name for it, until now." Evelyn touched her hand again. "Sometimes the truth arrives late, but when it does, it clears everything." Lily stayed until dusk. They walked the garden together. Evelyn showed her the wild thyme and the mint patch and the bench where the book club met in summer. When Lily left, she hugged her, not stiffly, not formally, fully, with her whole arms, like someone claiming something that was once stolen. That night, Evelyn sat in her chair under the stars, the same way she always did, wrapped in her shawl, the wind chimes whispering above her, and she let herself feel it. Not triumph, not vindication. Something purer. Continuity. She had spent so long mourning what was taken from her role as mother, her voice, her place at the table, but now a different story had begun to form. She had not been erased, she had been paused. And now a new generation had pressed play. In the weeks that followed, Lily returned. Not often, not to make amends for someone else's sins, but to build something of her own. They painted together, cooked side by side, shared silence that felt like understanding. Evelyn never asked about Daniel, never needed to. She no longer lived in the shadow of what was. She had claimed her own son. And in that light, she offered it freely to whoever came with an honest heart. The guest room stayed empty still, not out of bitterness, but out of choice. She didn't need to fill her house with ghosts to feel whole. And yet, when Lily knocked, the door opened, because Evelyn Clark had not only reclaimed her dignity, she had redefined legacy, not as inheritance, but as example, not as obligation, but as invitation. And with every cup of tea poured, every letter burned, every hand held beneath the moonlight, Evelyn lived as proof that the greatest revenge is not destruction. It's creation, the life she built, the peace she kept, the love she gave, not when she was asked to, but when she chose to.